Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer. This is their part number LB4350-400-646. This is a single acting spring hinge by Bommer, and it is a one of a family of single acting spring hinges that the manufacturer provides. The part number literally infers this specific hinge and all of the facets that collude to make this hinge. LB4350 means everything about this. When you change that part number, you'll change the hinge itself. This is I wouldn't say this is an uncommon hinge, but it is an unusual hinge, and that you can probably see one leaf is shorter than the other, and that's going to be a reference to the specific manufacturer of door and frame that uses this odd pattern of leaf width. So let's start with dissecting the part number. LB stands for Lube Bearing. That is a maintenance-free bearing construction from Bommer. The 4350 means a number of things. It means, first of all, that it is a square corner hinge, that it is full mortise. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves here that when they're brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. It also means that these holes for the screws, which we'll go over in a moment on the template, are in this particular set of locations. It does indeed mean that this hinge is 3 3/4 wide and 4 inch tall, and that one leaf is a little bit shorter, and that is for applications on Peachtree manufactured doors and frames. This part number also means that it is a hinge that has a leaf thickness of 96 thousandths, and my caliper tells me it's 0.098. 0.098. That would be considered residential grade. A commercial grade hinge would be a different part number, but it would be about 130 thousandths thick, basically, on a 4 inch tall hinge. Okay. We're going to look at the template in a moment and go over the dimensional properties of this hinge. But moving on through, the next part of the part number is 400. That specifically means that this hinge is 4 inch tall. And it would normally mean that the hinge is also 4 inch wide, except the LB4350 is an unusual variant for Peachtree, where it's 3 3/4 overall width. The 646 in the part number, that means two things. It means it's made of steel. Also means that it is in a satin nickel finish, and we'll go over the finishes that this is available in as well. Let's look at the extended description information down below. It's a full mortise hinge. It is a UL listed product for use on fire doors. Okay, let's study that. Now, where we are picking this video up is where we are looking at the UL listed for fire door applications. Now, that's pretty special to be able to understand. I have a copy of NFPA 80. My copy of NFPA 80 is on my site, and when I open that document and search spring hinge, we're going to be able to find instances of a spring hinge, not only its definition, but more in particular, specific references to the UL rating. So NFPA 80 talks about spring hinges. Where spring hinges are used, at least 2 shall be provided. Okay? So in order to have a fire rated door, you must use at least 2 spring hinges. All hinges or pivots except spring hinges shall be ball bearing type. In section 6.4.3.1.2.2, spring hinges shall be labeled and shall meet the requirements of ANSI BHMA A156.17, standard for self-closing hinges and pivots. They must be grade 1 rated. So, this is the really important part, shall be labeled. The term shall means must in NFPA standard speak. Shall is a suggestion. Shall is a requirement. Okay. So be mindful when they say shall. That means they must They must be labeled. So what that really boils down to is, for use on a fire-rated door, we have some requirements. Okay. This table talks about what is permissible. Okay. And we can see some self-closing. That would be our self-closing spring type. You're going to notice that there is no reference to spring type for any door that is wider than 3 foot. You get up here to the wider doors, there is no reference to spring hinges. So therefore, you cannot use a spring hinge on a door wider than 3 foot. Let's see, 3 foot wide. And we have spring type, 3 foot, minimum hinge size 4 inch. Okay. If you were to use a hinge, if you could have an 1 3/8" fire rated door, they do exist. But the requirements change in terms of the maximum door width. So this table, while it may not be super ultimately clear, it's crystal clear in terms of what's permitted. So be mindful that if you are using this 4-inch tall hinge on a fire-rated door, you cannot exceed a 3 foot wide door at all. You must have a minimum of 2 hinges on the door and shall be labeled. That's the really important part of this. Okay. Shall be labeled. Before we get to that, spring hinges should be adjusted to achieve positive latching when allowed to close freely from an open position of 30 degrees. So you need to be able to close the door when you're open at 30 degrees and must positively latch. Not at 45 degrees or not at 90 degrees. It must be able to close the door at 30 degrees. That's a requirement. Other products or spring hinges are limited in use either by door and frame construction. Okay, so that's basically saying that, you know, you have to use the hardware in accordance with what it's defined as. Let's finish that shall be labeled. Okay, so what they're saying is it shall be labeled, means it must be labeled. So a hinge, like the one from Bommer, that states that it is UL labeled, or is labeled, a spring hinge, in order for it to be used within the requirements of code, must bear visual evidence of it being fire rated. If you have a spring hinge on a door and it does not have that sort of visual evidence, it is not a fire rated product and is not permissible for use on fire rated doors. I've had people order spring hinges from me, and I had a gentleman order odd spring hinges, old style large barrel spring hinges, a clone of a Bommer hinge, basically an Asian import of a Bommer hinge. Client said, hey, where are my hinges? I need to get my door, my inspection done on my fire door. And I looked at the order and I said, well, these won't work. He's like, why? They're spring hinges. I'm like, well, sure, they're spring hinges. That's true. Has nothing to do with the fact that they're not labeled. They're not listed and they're not labeled as a fire-rated product. We were able to cancel that order, get him the proper product from Bommer so that he can operate correctly. I'm not here to say that the other hinge that he ordered wouldn't have worked in a fire test. I'm saying I am here to say that it wasn't a listed nor labeled product. That violates NFPA 80, and it is also a pretty clear indication that they never tested the hinge in a 3-hour fire test. Temperature gets to 1800 degrees within 3 minutes, parks there for 2 hours and 57 seconds. Who's to say that hinge survives that sort of test? So be mindful. You're looking for that label every single time. Okay, let's move on through the extended description. This is a grade 1 hinge. That means that it has been cycled to 1 million cycles and found to be compliant. I had one of many conversations with the head engineer at the manufacturer and said, how many, asked about how many cycles a hinge had passed. He says, I don't know, I pulled the plug at about 4.5 million cycles. Bommer is intensely proud of the engineering in this. And when you are able, as I have been, when the curtain is pulled back and you see the engineering that's happening inside of here, you quickly understand and realize this may be the most superior, the absolute superior spring hinge on the market, and it's because of what they do and how they've engineered a very particular confluence of engineering and parts inside of this spring hinge that makes it an absolutely dependable hinge, to say the least. It's non-handed. You can install this either which way you like, you know, left-hand doors, right-hand doors, however it needs to be. Self-lubricating bearings, that's a reference to the LB. This will not need maintenance. If for some reason it should, if you installed this in an exterior application and it's been out there and it's been getting surface corrosion, you'd be able to use some lubricant, which we have available for sale. Bommer endorsed product. Easily adjustable spring tension. We'll go over the setting of the tension. Special template hole location. We'll go over these weird hole locations when we get to the template. This is designed for Peachtree doors and frames. And this is compatible with other hinges that have a leaf thickness between 0.85 and 109 thick. So you can mix and match this with other hinges that will be that leaf thickness. Okay, you get outside of that leaf thickness and the geometry of the vertical axis of pivoting will change and it won't be compatible. I've had people call me and say, do you sell this LB4350 as a non-spring hinge? And the answer is I don't. I don't know where to get it except to call Peachtree. I've had people do that and just ended up chasing their tail, and I've said, if you can't find the non-spring hinge, just order all spring hinges and don't set the tension on one of them. Now, that's not necessarily an answer because a spring hinge is really not a load-rated product, but it's going to carry your Peachtree door. There's no doubt it will carry the load, and plus it will allow you to solve the problem without, you know, exerting energy to track something down that you may never find. Oh, actually, I've had people tell me when they've contacted, not necessarily Peachtree, although it could have been, they needed a 100-piece minimum, you know, something in that range. This is, again, made of steel with square corners. That's also inferred in the LB4350. 096, we tested that. It has 8 holes per hinge. This will include screws. This will include all wood screws and all machine screws in a complementary finish. Maximum door size, again, per our research before, 3 foot wide maximum, 7 foot tall also. Recommended maximum door weight, 85 pounds for 2 spring hinges, 110 pounds for 3 spring hinges. There's a link to the tension pin and the tension rod down below, which are included. For every order that you place, you'll get 1 tension rod. For every hinge that you'll order, you'll get 1 tension pin. Okay. Now, let's go over the links down below this video. Now, as we look at the page that we're on, we'll be able to pull up the template. Let's review that first. The document template will show you the dimensional properties that are important and the unequal leaf, 1 3/4 by 2 inch. I would generally find that the frame leaf would be the shorter leaf because the door leaf will generally go all the way through the door edge itself. It's mortised quite heavily. The important part of the template is to show you exactly where all the holes are laid out, and that would be obviously very important for you to verify that the holes for the screws are in the correct location prior to purchasing it. I'm not familiar with other unequal leaf hinges from other manufacturers, so if it is, well, certainly if you know it's Peachtree and it's unequal leaf, these hole locations are probably all but assured will be in the proper location. So this document, I would, if you're replacing existing, refer to this prior to ordering the material to be sure that you're going to get exactly the size that you do end up needing. Now, we had talked earlier, before we get to the Hinge, the installation instructions and the certifications and Hinge selection guide, I'd mentioned earlier about other finishes. And this is going to be available in lots of finishes. I just searched for LB4350-400, and you're going to see 600, 601, 603. So bright black japanned. This would, pardon me, this is prime coat. 601 is bright black japanned. 603 is zinc plated. It'd be a silver color. 604 would be a zinc dichromate. That would be a brass type color. 632 is polished brass. 633 is satin brass. 636 is satin brass blackened. I'm wondering if we're just going to call that antique brass. Let's take a look. Another handy document is under Contact Us, then Video Gallery of all places. Go to page 2, or at least currently, and then we're looking for Finish. Whoops. And that will get you to the BHMA finish chart. And that finish we were looking at was 636, which is listed here. That's called a US 7. Very unusual finish. I can't recall having ever seen it. I was thinking of US 5 is what I was thinking of 638. Plated satin brass, blackened, bright relieved, clear coated. So I'm going to interpret that as having more contrast between light and dark areas, whereas plated satin brass blackened satin relieved, will have some gold tone in it. But that document is really handy because it does give you an explanation and also a conversion to the US number. The US system was a code that was instituted about 1930 or so, something in that range. So back to our other finishes, 637, 638, 639, all of those variants on antique brass are available. And it just continues on and on. 640 would be oil rubbed bronze. 646 is satin nickel. 651 polished chrome. 652 satin chrome, etc. etc. Dark bronze enamel. Bommer is quite proud of all of the different finishes that they can provide. So now let's take a look. Let's jump over to the LB4350 400 646. Yeah, that's the hinge we're working on. So down here now to the installation instructions. And we're going to go over this on camera to discuss exactly how to set your tension pin to achieve the closing force necessary. Always use the manufacturer's original tension pin. They are not designed to stick out this far. That's only for reference purposes. They will be basically flush. I've had people try to install them in multiple holes for some reason. Well, those holes are drilled all the way through the tension collar, so you can only have one pin reside in there at one time. So be mindful of that. Not sure why the client was trying to put two of them in there. Maybe to just simply be a place to hold one, I guess. They had an extra. And we'll go over that. Factory original pins only are the best idea. Certifications and hinge selection guide. This gets us right back directly to our reference to NFPA 80. Okay, our code. Grade 1. It is ANSI A156.17 compliant. That was part of the code as well. Single acting spring hinge is used when you want to minimize cost of installing a door closing device on industrial, commercial, institutional, and residential applications, used to convert doors to self-closing in existing buildings for use in hotels, motels, apartments, dormitories, residences. Where doors are required to be self-closing, always verify local building code. NFPA 80 is a standard. It's not a code. The information we talked about earlier is a standard. However, when your local building code adopts it, it then is code. So we're we were looking at NFPA80 in context of it being a part of the local building code. This hinge will go up to a 3-hour rating. Unlikely you're going to have a Peachtree fire rated door, but you might. I'm not aware of what they manufacture. Up to 3070 as set forth in NFPA 80. Non-labeled doors, you can go bigger, 4 foot if you like. For doors up to 60 inch, you would use 2 hinges. For every 30 inch thereafter, add an additional hinge. So our typical 6'8" door would have 3 hinges because that's 80 inch. It falls between 60 inch and 90 inch. If you had an 8-foot door, you would add a hinge, so you'd have 4 because that's greater than 7'6". This is a chart that we talked about earlier about the recommended weight. We're in the 400 column. Okay. And then we talked about mixing and matching earlier, which is listed there again. So let's hop over to the installation instructions and go over on camera how we're going to go about setting the tension on this hinge. Okay, now setting the tension on this hinge. With the tension collar pointed up, you'll see that there's a collar here that has holes in it. There's not one over here. You can install it either way, but for demonstration purposes, with the tension collar pointed up, we're going to take our tension rod and just poke it out of the tension collar. You'll insert that into one of the holes and then turn it clockwise. And as you do, you reveal new additional holes. It's into those new additional holes that you will insert your tension pin. This client ordered 2 hinges, so there are 2 tension pins. If you did it upside down, which is okay, turn it counterclockwise. Same difference. What you'll do is you'll simply hang your door with no tension at all, so that you can hang your door, attach the screws, hang the door, then start to set tension. You will always want to, if you're doing 2 hinges on a door, that takes 3, or you're doing 3, that takes 4, you'll always set the top hinge last, or leave that without a spring hinge. Use a standard ball bearing hinge there. The top hinge does not, the top hinge has a more primary task, and that is hanging the door. 70% of the weight of the door is borne by that top hinge, so it's not going to be super effective at carrying the weight itself, and of course just getting the door to close. So set that tension on your middle hinge and your bottom hinge first. Middle hinge would be the way to go. I've had clients call me and say, yeah, this hinge has worked for 10 years and the top spring hinge broke. How many are on the door? Well, there's 2. Okay, that's fine. Let's get you a new spring hinge. But when you install them, put that spring hinge in the middle location. That top hinge should be that ball bearing hinge. Not a plain bearing hinge. It should be a ball bearing hinge. A ball bearing hinge is important because it will carry the load of the door, and you'll find a much greater amount of satisfaction out of the door closing when the hinges are arranged in the proper rotation, sequence, I suppose. On the top of the installation instructions, it says, do not exceed 3 holes of tension if you're going to 180 degrees. Okay? If you are going to 180 degrees, only go with 3 holes of tension. If you're going to 90, then you can go to 4 holes of tension. If you hear creaking inside of there, and it's a brand new hinge, and you know that you've gone past 4 holes of tension, you're going to need to back that down because damage is going to ensue on the hinge. Is your door for some reason absolutely unusually heavy? Is there some sort of environmental condition that's preventing the hinge from working in the under the guidelines of which it was engineered? Do you not have enough spring hinges? So be mindful to work within the constraints. And the rest of the installation instructions I just demonstrated. So there's not much to it in that regard. You definitely want to use the factory original pins. There has been, I don't know if there's been a lawsuit, but there has certainly been an investigation into non-factory original pins when someone hurt themselves, actually, making unintentional contact with the spring hinge with a finish nail sticking out that's been end cut together. So be mindful to use the factory original pins and seat them flush. You can't hurt yourself with the factory original pin. If I poke that out and run it on my skin, you're not going to break the skin. With an end cut finish nail, tempered finish nail, you will. I'm not a fan of spring hinges, and it's because I don't believe they do the job that otherwise a proper piece of equipment it should be meant or left to do the job, like a hydraulic door closer. Spring hinges are used because there's no other realistic application on the front door of your house that you want to have spring hinges on, or the garage door to the mudroom. That could be a 20-minute door. Are you going to install a hydraulic door closer? No. No, nor should you. A hydraulic door closer gives control over the door because you have hydraulic control over the different degrees of setting on the unit. This is just a kind of a dumb piece of, mechanical equipment. Increase tension, release tension. Increase tension, release tension. Sometimes what people will find, like in that example from NFPA 80, they want you to be able to open that door to 30 degree and it has to be able to close and latch. Well, if you let that door go from 90 degree, it's going to slam like heck, maybe bounce open. It's, most people will walk through a door and kind of just let it go behind them, not go through the door, turn around, let it go to 30 degree and then release. If you find that you have a spring hinge arrangement and you're not getting the door closed and latched, you have to investigate why. You might need more spring hinges, or it might be an application where spring hinges are not appropriate for the application and you have to go to hydraulic control. Adding more spring hinges might work if you are underpowered in that department, because with more springs will come the potential for more stored energy, and as you release the door, there'll be more available energy at the very final end of that closing cycle, where you want the door to be able to close and latch, but do so without slamming. Okay, and if you have a residential door or a common door like a 3-flat or a 6-flat, and you do have spring hinges, go with all spring hinges. Why? You have more ability to adjust the closing force over time, because the requirements that you'll place on the spring hinge will be different in the summer than it will be in the middle of winter. Air pressures are different. The use of the building is different. Windows will be open in the summer. Air will pass through more easily, allowing the door to slam close faster. You can back it down, dial down the tension. More spring hinges will afford the ability to do that. Okay, so setting tension is pretty easy. So we talked about the listing that's on there. You've got to have that if it's a fire-rated door. It's also nice to know that the hinge you're buying is grade 1. That is the highest grade rating available to architectural hardware. That means 1,000,000 cycles. The final thing I'd like to point out is the Bommer logo, and right above it, it says Made in USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. If you have any questions on the Bommer LB4350 in a 400 size, in a 646 finish, or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.